And so it's very easy for a patient to end up sort of feeling like they're not progressing when in fact they really are. They just don't see it because it's just those little movements back and forth.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 154 of the Strokecast. Let's talk about high-tech inpatient gear. But first, this week's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. And by the fine folks at Like Minded. To find out if Like Minded can help you live your best post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/Like Minded. This week, I talk with Rich Russo, CEO of Bionik, Inc. Bionik makes robotic therapy devices for use in inpatient facilities. And we often talk about at-home stuff, but this week we're talking about stuff for use inpatient. It's a tool that a therapist can use with a patient to get a lot more reps in when doing an exercise than the therapist can get with that patient without the device. And of course, we all know that more reps equals better neuroplasticity. Combine that with advanced data analysis, and you've really got something interesting to help with stroke patient recovery. So now, let's meet Rich Russo. So, Rich, thanks so much for joining us on the show this week.
Appreciate it, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Now, I've always been a technology geek, and I love the idea of what can we do with computers and with other tools that we're able to develop and bring to bear. Yep. And Bionik has got some really interesting stuff that you've developed for use in rehab facilities. So what is the Bionik InMotion arm?
The InMotion technology, it's an evidence-based sort of neurorehabilitation technology. And really what that does is it helps to provide our patients with real-time assistance as needed. When you think about sort of the arm and sort of the range of motion that, an everyday, person uses, this device, this technology allows a patient who has been traumatized through some injury, whether it's stroke or some other, cerebrovascular accident or whatnot. This robot and this technology allows that patient to now get sort of that mobility back, where if they go sort of the traditional therapy route, it's certainly a lot less involved in terms of the use that patient will see during a therapy session versus using the InMotion technology itself.
You used one of my favorite phrases there, and that's evidence-based, because there is so much snake oil out there. There are so many people out there who just want to take money from hospitals and from survivors. So let's talk a little bit then about what you mean by evidence-based in this technology.
Yeah, so we go back, 25 years, back to about 1998, specifically within MIT. There was a project called the Manus Project that started back it's going back before 1998. It's actually most of the 90s, where the first rehabilitation robot was used in clinical trials, introducing technology where basically they had tried to get 15-time increase in sort of repetitions in treatment, specifically with an assist as needed technology. In other words, basically you were moving, if you move your arm sort of back and forth, obviously, if you've had a stroke or if you've had some other TBI or whatnot, obviously your range and mobility is very limited potentially. But with the technology that they were producing these clinical trials with, they were able to take the technology and use this assist as needed. So basically, it almost sort of gave the patient a nudge with their arm. And so in the patient's mind, they were sort of seeing that repetition. And so you think about, there's another term that I like to use, this neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to sort of form and sort of reorganize these synaptic connections, if you will, especially if there's been a severe accident or stroke. This neuroplasticity was basically patient was able to sort of see that happen in real time. And so this study took place using this technology, using these algorithms over the course of that decade during the 90s. And then it wasn't till, just after the turn of the century where interactive motion technologies exclusively licensed to MIT and managed to produce the first commercially successful robotic rehabilitation system, and we called it InMotion. And so that really was based on those algorithms and that proven research that occurred in that MIT Manus lab. And so we feel pretty proud of that, and we always, we tend to look back toward our roots, which is sort of where we've come from over the years.
MIT is certainly recognized for some of the amazing things they have done in technology and engineering really across our society. So that's really cool. There's using the term turn of the century to describe this timing just sort of hurts me deep inside a bit there.
Yeah. No, neuroplasticity is a term that it's near and dear to my heart a little bit, just because it really is sort of retraining the brain, if you will. It's very easy for a stroke patient or for someone that's dealing with, this sort of unknown, especially sort of the first time a patient or a family is going through this. And so it's very easy for, to be sort of down in the dumps and not have this very positive outlook on your prognosis and whatnot. What I think is really good about the InMotion technology is that it really once a patient starts to use it, you start to see something in a patient that you traditionally wouldn't see, because, traditional therapy, if I sort of look at traditional therapy and what that entails, the patient is so dependent upon the skill of the therapist to achieve proper motion with each activity that the patient will perform. But with the InMotion robots, the motion is based upon research principles of Reach. And it's exactly the same for every repetition. So in addition, the largest difference that you traditionally see in a therapy session, a normal therapy session, the average number of repetitions achieved is between, 30 to 60 repetitions. But with the InMotion technology, the number of repetitions in the same sort of 60-minute session, if you will, it's over 1,000. When I think about that, so the threshold for achieving neuroplasticity, again, that sort of ability for the brain to form and reorganize patterns and connections, it's about 400 to 600 treatments per session to regain that neuroplasticity. So if a patient using InMotion technology is doing over 1,000 repetitions in a 60-minute, treatment session, if you will, this really allows the therapist to use the robot to achieve the repetitions, not only in a single session, but really across the full treatment spectrum. A patient is really seeing the benefit of regaining that mobility a lot quicker through the use of the InMotion technology versus just going your standard traditional sort of therapy, session that you would typically see. And so I really think that win for that patient and that hope, I think, is really critical, especially, for first time, stroke patients, first time TBIs, because there's just such a way about it in the beginning where patients don't really know what to expect.
Did I hear you right? You're saying that in a typical hour session, then you're able to get in up to 1,000 repetitions?
1,000 repetitions. It's absolutely game changing, in my opinion.
That works out to roughly more than one repetition every 4 seconds.
Correct.
So, I mean, I've seen the pictures of this stuff online. It sounds like then you've just got people's arms rapidly moving back and forth, almost cartoon levels. So, I mean, what is the experience like as a patient when you're in this InMotion robot or have your arm hooked into this thing?
Yeah, there's a visual there, right? No, so you're sitting at, it almost looks like a desk, right? And you're sitting sort of at this table, and you have a screen sort of at eye level just above you, just in front of you. You fit your arm into this sort of sleeve that sort of comes up to your elbow. And there's two technologies that we offer. One is the arm, which is again to sort of regain the mobility of again, not just the arm, but really, the elbow, the shoulder, the wrist. It even helps with sort of posture, core, and balance, which I think are all critical aspects of sort of the neuroplasticity function.
That's one of the things that often gets overlooked when, not necessarily by therapists, but in the broader stroke culture and the way people look at stroke, is that it's not just the arm or the leg, it's all the muscles on the right or left side of the body that typically go offline, which includes everything that's in the chest to balancing the core, to in the hips, to even a lot of the muscles that may be involved in stomach support, abdominal support, digestion, all of that stuff, face, arm, legs, and everything in between on one side of the body can absolutely be impacted. So it's not just that a stroke may cause you to have balance challenges by impacting the balance centers of the brain, but by actually turning off access to those core muscles and those other muscles in that side of the body, that also affects your ability to sit up, to move, to reach, to do all of this stuff, to even process your lunch.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why this is, that's why this technology, really sort of incorporates all of those aspects, into it. So when we say, the InMotion arm, sure, that's the name of the product. And yes, obviously the focus is to sort of work on regaining the mobility of the arm, but it really incorporates all of those other facets, which in some cases can be just as critical to the overall patient experience and patient outcome. The second product that we offer is the arm hand, which the hand component, it's a hand grasping sort of training component that's an extension of the InMotion arm. And it really works to combine sort of the isolated movement patterns that focus on reach and grasp. Again, if I'll sort of, compare it to sort of that traditional, therapy session without the technology, you're working to sort of, move your arm around, work on sort of range of motion in different directions, push, pull, etc. And so when you think about, what does a patient experience when they leave that therapy, right? What are the common, sort of household tasks, reaching to a cabinet to, get something out of the cupboard, obviously being able to use the bathroom in their house, being able to get dressed every morning. These are all sort of, again, real life things that a patient is dealing with and having to sort of relearn and reteach themselves, oftentimes with the help of a family member or a loved one. And so we really use the technology to sort of help sort of, an everyday patient really start to regain some of those aspects. And that's why all those other things, not just sort of the mobility and the range of motion of an arm or a hand, but also the shoulder, the elbow, the balance, the posture, all of those things go into, because if you don't have balance and you're trying to reach for the cupboard at home, just because maybe you can reach up there, but if your balance gives out, again, now you've sort of set yourself back and you're really trying to, sort of pick everything back up again. So that's why the focus and the use of this technology is so critical, because yes, it may help with the mobility pieces of it, but it's also just as important for the other pieces that really help to support the foundation of regaining that mobility with use of the arm or the hand.
Yeah, nothing will set your recovery back faster than a fall and an additional injury. I remember one of the things that I did with the amazing trio of OTs that I worked with, Olivia, Emily, and Barb, was, in working with hands and grasp, they, actually did hand over hand taping, where the OT actually physically uses tape to attach their hand to mine and their fingers to mine. And it's a great therapeutic exercise for grasp and for motion and things like that, but it's just not scalable.
No, 100%. And that's the thing that we're trying to, work toward right now, is sort of the scalability. We have, this software component to our system. InMotion Connect is sort of this, it's almost like a modem looking thing. And then within that, device, the InMotion Connect device, that sort of sits on the actual robotic technology, is a software called InMotion Pulse. And right now that Pulse software, that Connect device is really acquiring all this data from use of that robot as it relates to various patient sessions, movements of the patient, etc. And it really is helping, hospital staff and hospital administrators really have access to a lot of data that, that we believe is valuable to that, administration, et cetera, to be able to make decisions, et cetera. The sort of the next wave of this and what we're sort of focused on now, sort of behind the scenes, is really how can we bring that data directly to the patient? At the end of the day, that's sort of the focus here, right? That sits at the center of all of this is how do we improve the patient experience and the patient outcome in the continuum of care. Our biggest customer, Kindred, they're an inpatient rehab center. And so typically a patient will, after the first 2 to 3 weeks of a traumatic brain, injury or stroke, they'll use our robot, 3-4 times over the course of 2 weeks. But really it's that outpatient session where, you may spend, another 6 months in outpatient rehab off and on. And so it's how do we take that sort of next step with the patient simultaneously? And so we have many outpatient rehab centers, that we're trying to partner with to be able to bring that technology to those patients and ultimately bring that data to that. Because to me, into Bionik and sort of what sets us apart, I believe, is sort of the differentiation of how we bring that experience directly to the patient. It sort of says a lot when a patient can look at something, whether it's an app on their phone or something that they can sort of look at and say, okay, I'm seeing improvement in my ability. It's one thing to think it and it's one thing to feel it, but to actually see it happening. This is sort of the next wave of that InMotion Connect, and this is what we're focused on behind the scenes at our company at the moment.
And that's one of those things that is so important, not just from a patient motivation perspective, when you can actually see in the data how far you've come. It's why I tell folks from early in your recovery, take a lot of pictures and a lot of videos, because you're not going to see the recovery that's happening.
That's right.
Because you live it every day. Of course, with just the nature of healthcare in America, the insurance companies will stop paying if there's not not seeing improvement in your care. If you can document ongoing improvement in that, yes, you are getting results from this therapy, it becomes easier to get the insurance company to fund another 3 days or week or 2 weeks in inpatient therapy, which can be so important. The other thing that I think is really, really interesting there is when you're talking about this data component, this is something that we are seeing so many organizations start to pursue that we've talked to in the past. Modus Nova certainly leverages the data to give the patient a better experience, as do organizations like Neofect, like Sentinel Healthcare, like Raccoon Recovery. We keep hearing this theme over and over again about using AI and using this data collection to customize a therapy experience for the patient, to be able to share it back to the therapist or beyond as appropriate, to even go ahead and start looking at what happens when we can aggregate data across hundreds or thousands of patients to really improve the experience. So is that aligning with your goals regarding this data as well?
Yeah, it certainly is. And, you mentioned a couple other products there. And I think sort of while Neofect and Modus, I think, focus on that same principle of neuroplasticity. I think where we differ a bit is that their device, obviously is home-based and it's sort of patient and focuses on the restoring the use of, only the hand or the foot. And that's where I think the InMotion system is a bit different, because yes, it is obviously used at hospital inpatient or outpatient settings, treatment guided by the trained therapist. And additionally, I think that our device more focuses on sort of that all aspect, right? That whole, not just the arm, it's the whole sort of gamut, the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, the hand, all facets of it. It sort of goes along the same lines of what we were talking about earlier. All pieces from my standpoint, I believe, are critical and sort of the regaining of the mobility. I do think that there is something to be said about, what other data could we capture outside of the therapeutic session. And that is something that we are trying to explore, especially in this day and age with COVID and sort of having to think a little differently, where a lot of clinical settings are sort of happening outside and more virtual in nature, right? We're trying to think about, obviously, our device, still is only going to be used sort of in-house in that inpatient setting. But what other aspects could we gain and data points could we gain from outside of that setting, right? And these are some things that we're trying to explore, again, behind the scenes, and trying to give that patient, that whole continuum of care, a real good look to making sure that we're, helping to improve the patient outcome ultimately.
As patients ourselves, and really, even non-stroke folks are going out there, and we're just acquiring more data about ourselves through everything from Fitbits to the sensors that are embedded in our phones to, Omron's developed a crazy expensive blood pressure watch to all this stuff. How can we bring all of this stuff together to provide better care?
That's right.
With the InMotion arm and hand and the combos, are they working by then just taking the patient through the physical motion to engage those pathways in the brain, or are they incorporating things like FES or other technology to drive the patient's muscles to engage as well?
Yeah, no. So it's the former. So, so as the patient is, in sort of the sling and sort of, looking at the screen, the patient is taken through sort of a variety of games to sort of engage and, sort of stimulate the brain activity and sort of follow the movements. And so you're getting sort of this range of motion out of that. Again, going through that repetitive that over and over repetition. And you're really starting to then almost get a visual of, sort of like an 8-point star, if you will. And you'll see, a patient over a, 10-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute session, if you will, depending, on how severe their injury is, you'll really start to see, where they're hindering, where they're lacking. And so then really the therapist can then start to tailor that session into those particular ranges, right? So in some cases, a patient, they can't go full distance in front of them, right? But they can go right and left, fairly easily, or more easily, I should say. And so again, it really helps the therapist sort of tailor that session to the patient. And then again, start to see those improvements over time, where they can now regain that mobility back and forth, just as well as they could have done right and left. Again, all of these things are, sure, they're engaging to the patient, but at the end of the day, it's focused on sort of going through that range of motion, going through, the repetitions over and over, and really trying to stimulate the brain to reteaching, yourself, to be able to move and have that range of motion that you once had.
This use and this improvement is so based on the partnership with the occupational therapist. I mean, This is not something where the OT can sort of hook up your arm and start the machine and then they can go take a smoke break.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it is one-to-one, dealing with the therapist. And again, you're still getting that interaction, which I think, is so critical to that patient and sort of their passion to the experience and trying to, see that because again, you don't see those outcomes, every single session, right? You see it over a period of time. And so it's very easy for a patient to end up sort of feeling like they're not progressing when in fact they really are. They just don't see it because it's just those little movements back and forth. So that interaction with that therapist is really critical.
Of course, COVID is sort of the gift that keeps on giving to this world, from everything from increasing the likelihood of you experiencing a stroke. Even if you've recovered from COVID, you're at higher risk of stroke now due to the hypercoagulability that often results from a COVID infection, the irritation of the epithelial cells in the brain, as Dr. Jason Hinman told us about a year ago. So we got the increased likelihood. We've also got now patients not necessarily going to the hospital quickly enough because they're afraid of COVID in the emergency room. And even once you do get to the hospital, there's still the chance that the ICU is going to be filled with people who didn't get their vaccines and now are experiencing COVID. So It's impacting that level of care. It's impacting inpatient rehab. It's impacting the outpatient rehab experience as hospitals have to restrict the number of patients coming in, the ability to interact with patients, and with all of this, just because of the volume that healthcare resources are being redirected. And I've accidentally slipped into a rant here, but I mean, as we look at how this is impacting all these different elements of care, how has then COVID impacted access to the Bionik devices and even just the way that Bionik is approaching the facilities?
Yeah, so Bill, so I can appreciate the rant. We all sort of, have had our own sort of stories about COVID and dealings with it on some level. And you are right. Certainly patients, with severe COVID certainly have a much higher risk of stroke. I think the risk of, is roughly 6 to 8% out there, which, doesn't seem like a lot, but, when you start sort of comparing and sort of starting to, see some of these correlations, especially where a patient who's recovered from severe COVID, right? And then 2 to 3 weeks later, they've now suffered a stroke, unfortunately. So there is some correlation there. And even at the height of the pandemic, going back to sort of mid 2020, testing for COVID became an important diagnostic tool for stroke in sort of otherwise healthy individuals to determine, COVID factors, right? This isn't happening so much today just because of the wide distribution of vaccines. But, when I think about sort of the impact to Bionik, the restrictions really, that have been imposed haven't so much impacted the use of the technology within hospitals that currently have a system. In fact, I think it's enhanced and increased the use as patients with COVID have a higher incidence of stroke, as we both sort of noted here. In fact, I think about, a couple of the sites specifically. We actually Bionik donated a unit to Moss Rehab, which is just outside of Philadelphia, to be used in their Core Plus unit, which was really established for the exclusive treatment and rehabilitation of COVID patients. And so they were seeing, some of that correlation between those COVID patients and the incidence of stroke, and trying to really understand the connections there. And then, with use of the technology, really trying to gain a better understanding of how, this was, really all came together. I think where Bionik has really seen the biggest impact as it relates to COVID is really our team and our employees and our staff to really interact with our current and even potential partners based on the restrictions, with access to hospitals right now. However, I do think, with today's technology, we've been able to engage our partners virtually with great success, albeit it's not ideal, but, we've been able to adapt in those moments where we've needed to. As someone that's interested in the technology and has the funding to buy the technology and to purchase it, you go and try to schedule these demos, and then they go and cancel them on you, or have to postpone. And no one wants to make an investment in this technology, or in any technology for that matter, without actually touching and feeling the equipment, right? Any capital purchase to a hospital is a big deal, and we want them to feel that it's a well warranted purchase to get in there and touch and feel, and we want to be able to demonstrate that as well. So that's really been our biggest challenge, is sort of overcoming some of those restrictions within the hospitals at the moment.
So with the software and data you're able to access then, are your internal metrics from all these devices in the field showing a change in utilization or a change in per patient utilization over the last couple of years?
Yeah, actually, they have. In fact, we have more than 300 devices out there currently in the U.S., and we've seen about a 70 to 75% increase in reported inpatient sessions on the devices, specifically in the Kindred facilities nationwide. We have about 30. Kindred has about 30 of our units in their various hospitals all across the board since really roughly the beginning of the pandemic, going back to March 2020. They've all seen an increase in that 70 to 75% range average of use of the device, which is phenomenal. Again, and it's really, allowing patients to just access the technology, and hopefully they're coming away with feeling like they've regained some of that mobility that they once had, which is obviously critical.
My assumption would have been just the opposite, as I know facilities have closed inpatient and even outpatient rehab facilities in light of having to use the space for other patients or from just their restrictions on bringing people in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think in particular has been driving then that increase? Because suddenly getting upwards of 70% more use out of a significant capital investment, that's a phenomenal ROI for the facilities who've deployed this.
Yeah, and so some of the other metrics that we have and that we've been able to sort of obtain, so not only have we seen it's about roughly again a 72% increase in patient sessions on the devices themselves nationwide. We've also seen an almost 60% increase in total session hours, a 47% increase in total number of patients using the robot, a 65% increase in individual patient treatment time, and a 47% increase in number of patient repetitions, sort of the movements themselves. This is over sort of that span between, the end of 2020. So again, sort of right in the height of the pandemic, if you will, through about the middle or last summer, roughly, of 2021. So within the last few months. And I think really what's driving that is really sort of the clinician engagement at each of the facilities that have the technology. We believe that this, positive growth trend will continue, as I think, all healthcare facilities really want innovative technologies. I think that they, a lot of them are chomping at the bit for innovative technologies, not just for Bionik, but for all innovative technologies, right? They want to always explore the latest for their patients and to try and enhance the quality of the patient care. I think, again, one of the things that separates Bionik is sort of that, that artificial intelligence and the data, grasping InMotion Connect. And I think that hopefully is going to continue to penetrate the market.
That's fascinating. And I know a lot of therapists I've talked about, they love getting new technology and new things in to supplement what they're doing, not replace what they're doing.
Yep.
With everything from just traditional patterns
Yep.
of, putting on your seatbelt, drawing your sword, that sort of stuff, holding
Yep.
the ball, making snow angels on the mat table, being able to supplement it with this stuff is great. As you've been going through this, how did this make the transition from that Manus project at MIT into a startup technology company that's been able to deploy across hundreds of facilities over the last couple of decades? Because it doesn't sound like a lot of growth, but that is a lot of growth for navigating hospital bureaucracies and all of that fun stuff.
You hit the nail on the head. We sort of went from that MIT Manus lab, back in sort of the mid to late 90s, in the early 2000s, Interactive Motion Technologies exclusively licensed, to MIT Manus to produce sort of the first commercial successful, robotic rehabilitation system, i.e. InMotion. And then it wasn't until 2016 where, Bionik acquired IMT, InMotion, again, Interactive Motion Technologies. And then that's where we adapted the robotic systems for not only broader clinical use, but also commercialization, and introduced it to inpatient and outpatient facilities. And then it wasn't till mid 2020 where InMotion Connect and the InMotion Connect Pulse, that data enhancing software, that was introduced, all sort of again with that patient outcome, with that in mindset. It's been a process in the making, and again, we actively trying to get out there and again continue to penetrate the market. We are looking at expanding internationally. We sell right now into Korea, which is one of our hotter markets, but we are also looking at Europe and Asia Pac, and specifically in China expansion as well. So these are all things that again we sort of have going on behind the scenes, which is great. It's certainly an exciting time at Bionik for sure.
So what was it, Rich, that then drew you into this field? Why did you want to get into this robotics field? Was that sort of coming from the engineering background, from the neurology background, or what was your path into this?
I was a finance guy. That's sort of my background. And, I've come up through the ranks, so to speak. I spent a lot of time in med device throughout my career and certain other pharma companies, but again, always with sort of that finance mindset. I came from a med device company called Cynosure, where they focused on aesthetic lasers. And then it wasn't until I started at Bionik about a year and a half ago now. And, it's interesting because med device has always been something that I've been passionate about, but I never explored sort of the rehabilitation side of it until just before I joined Bionik. It wasn't, when I think about the rehabilitation side of med device, it's not sort of that sexy, industry, if you will, out there, but it is obviously a very big need, and there's a very big market for it. But it's always fallen into the world of where insurance reimbursement has always been a challenge, and so therefore it's an industry where it doesn't get a lot of sort of visibility, at least in my opinion, anyway. So this was definitely something that sort of fell on my lap a bit about a year and a half ago. In 18 months, it feels like it's almost been 18 years, of being here. And very quickly, I joined, in the middle of COVID, and it has been a roller coaster ride, to say the least. Again, trying to adapt to the way we sell our product, trying to adapt to, an ever evolving COVID experience and how we interact and deal with our patients and our customers. And then ultimately, trying to figure out and navigate how we continue to grow our company, just like any company today. Some companies have been more impacted by COVID than others. But I also, I'm a believer of trying to look forward, and, you only can use COVID as an excuse for so long before you start to say, okay, you know what, we gotta adapt. And I don't think COVID's going anywhere. It's just a matter of how we're going to learn to live with it and how do we move on from it in some respects, right?
One of the things that I think we can take away from this experience and this broader societal shift we're going through to this hybrid work environment. And obviously, in the interest of disclosure, my day job is as a corporate trainer with Microsoft, which is also a big proponent of the hybrid work environment. But I've been working remotely since 1998 in the technology space across a variety of companies. One of the things that I think is really important is that over the last 10, 15 years, the technology to work remotely has improved a lot. And a lot of folks who are living with disabilities, not just stroke, but the broader disabled persons community, has been asking for accommodations for, 10, 15, 20 years, including remote work, including alternative working environments. And a lot of companies have historically said, no, we can't do that. It's too hard. Well, now we've gone ahead and suddenly in 2020, all these companies had to suddenly make it work. And you know what? They made it work. So when we come back, once we get on the other side of this, when they start, I don't want to hear any of these companies telling disabled people that, no, we can't accommodate your work from home. You have to come back into the office for the community and the experience, because we know that is nonsense, and we can't allow that to slide back. We've got to continue to recognize the resources that the disabled persons community is able to provide to the economy for people who are able to work and want to work with just the accommodations that maybe they have to work from home. Maybe they're not physically or brainily able to manage a commute. And there are just all these other opportunities now for people who've been discriminated against in the past. And again, I slipped into another rant there.
No, it's good.
Not my intention, but
I appreciate it.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, let's talk about sponsor Modus Nova. Modus Nova helps brain injury survivors recover the use of an affected limb with the power of neuroplasticity and repetition and video games. The Modus Hand is an air-powered, AI-controlled robotic exoskeleton. It helps you move your hand to complete actions in video games that you play on the included touchscreen monitor. One of the things I really like about it is that it's also, of course, internet connected and frequently getting updated. And I just fired it up the other day, and I have more new games in my list of rehab exercises to do on my Modus hand. So I like that it's continuing to get better, that continuing to push out new changes and new updates and give me new things that I can do. Recovering an affected hand or foot, as we know, it requires thousands of hours of repetitive motion. The Modus hand and the Modus foot help you do that without getting bored. And to find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of a stroke-affected limb, all you have to do is visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST for 10% off your first month. And now back to our hack of the week.
I would suggest, and I would say, wear comfortable socks. Comfortable socks make all the difference in the world when you're on your feet and you're in your home and you're trying to be comfortable. Wear comfortable socks.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that is actually a really important recommendation.
It really is.
And, it's those simple things that make a difference. And there is, I've spent my time working retail. I understand the importance of comfortable footwear, and it's not someplace to skimp. But you're right. Even from one of the perks of the winter is being able to wear super floofy and comfortable socks. And as a survivor, you want to make sure your socks are going to discourage slipping, that they will fit in your shoes with your AFO. And I have found that sometimes even just making sure you wear socks that go higher up on your calf provide better protection for an AFO or other gear. And there's just something that's just really nice about comfortable socks. Rich, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
LinkedIn, that would probably be the best place to stay connected to sort of all things Bionik. Bionik with a K, Bionik, Inc., INC period. That is our LinkedIn page. We're constantly updating things there and things that are happening with us. Various shows that we're going to be at, information as it comes, that we'll put out there, various press releases, go through there. And that's sort of the best way to stay on track and to keep updated with us.
Fantastic. And we'll have links to that over in the show notes in the app you're listening to right now and at strokecast.com.
Excellent.
So Rich, this has been a great conversation, despite me going off on my tangents there from time to time.
All good.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show this week.
Bill, I appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about sponsor Like-Minded. Like-Minded is a nonprofit membership program that helps you live your best post-stroke life. Like-Minded offers classes on everything from hand exercises to telling your story. The virtual classes are led by survivors, by OTs, by PTs, by doctors, and more. Many of them have actually appeared as guests on the Strokecast in the past, and I've always had some fantastic conversations with them. These classes are held throughout the week, but if you can't attend the one you want, that's okay, because members get access to the recorded version of the sessions, so you can still catch up. If you have a specific question, reach out to the private text messaging group that's a part of the program. Get the support you need and deserve to live your best life. To find out if Like-Minded is right for you, visit strokecast.com/like-minded and use promo code STROKECAST to save 20% off your first month. My epilogue this week is going to be brief, and that's because I'm tired, very tired, but half of it is for good reason. The other half is really just the world news. But the good stuff is that I'm heading out on an adventure next week, and I'm going to talk more about that in a future episode, but I am super excited about it. I've also recently wrapped up a series of talks to 3 different stroke support groups, a class of occupational therapy students at the University of Washington, and a panel with the American Heart Association's Stroke Connection program at the International Stroke Conference. So, as you can imagine, it's been kind of an intense month or so. Regardless, we are now heading into spring here in the United States, and the COVID numbers are starting to get a little bit better. I can't wait to see what is going to be happening in the coming months. I'm really excited and hopeful that we're going to have a nice, calm, safe spring here in the U.S., and we'll be able to get out and take advantage of some of the different things in the community. So head on over to strokecast.com/Bionik. That's Bionik with a K, Bionik, to learn more about Rich and the work his company does. You'll find all those links and more at strokecast.com/Bionik. Share this episode with someone you know by giving them the link strokecast.com/Bionik. And that again is Bionik with a K. Subscribe to the Strokecast email newsletter by visiting the link strokecast.com/news. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.